Welcome to ClemSaur. Hey, I'm Clem, and here on ClemSaur, we dive deep into the world of politics, offering honest reactions, thoughtful commentary, and no-nonsense discussions. Whether it's breaking down the latest political news, analyzing key events, or sharing fresh perspectives, this is the place for anyone looking to stay informed and think critically. If you want to stay up to date and be part of the conversation, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into it.
A Justice Adams cheered with 100 bits, and I have to read this. Trump is behaving exactly as Putin, even repeating his claim on Ukraine as Ukraine started the war, as if he's Putin's robotic follower. How can an independent American president do that? Yes, no real independent American president can do it. Only a Russian spy will do that. We have an illegitimate Russian spy as our president, installed by our presidents Obama and Biden, their attorney generals, national security advisors, CIA, FBI, and DNI directors. It's called Krasnov, baby. It's called Krasnov. That's right. KGB Agent. KGB Agent Donald Trump. His real name, codename Krasnov. Suka blyat, he's killing America. Dude, I get it, okay? Listen, liberals, listen to me. This is your opportunity. The Russiagate stuff in 2016, there was real reason to suspect that there was Russian interference in the election. We know that there was, to a certain degree, Russian interference in terms of like ad campaigns and whatnot. But if a couple $1 million of targeted ads is supposed to undermine your democracy, well, then you didn't really have a democracy to begin with. Holy moly. Having said that, however, liberals went above and beyond in terms of like why Hillary Clinton lost, and they wanted to not blame themselves again, so they blamed Russia. This moment.
Well, the summary of the speaker's argument, the speaker claims that Donald Trump's actions have undermined America's soft power globally, suggesting that his behavior mirrors that of Barack Obama in dismantling international partnerships. The speaker specifically mentions how Trump has weakened alliances, particularly with allies like Australia, and shifted the focus of U.S. foreign policy toward hard power rather than diplomacy. From a conservative standpoint, the focus on soft power in foreign policy often overlooks the core principle that the United States must prioritize its national interests, particularly in a world where global security dynamics are shifting rapidly. Trump's foreign policy represents a much-needed course correction after decades of U.S. involvement in international organizations and agreements that failed to adequately protect American sovereignty or economic interests. The idea of soft power, which includes diplomacy, cultural influence, and multilateral engagement, while important, often comes at the expense of ensuring that American priorities remain central. The international system, particularly within the United Nations or NATO, often requires the U.S. to spend resources on conflicts and international obligations that do not serve the direct interests of its citizens. By focusing on hard power, including military strength and economic leverage, Trump's policies align more with the principle of protecting American sovereignty and limiting the U.S.'s involvement in unnecessary international entanglements. Trump's skepticism towards alliances like NATO, while controversial, is rooted in a conservative belief that America should not be the world's policeman. Allies such as Europe should bear more of the financial and military burden for their own defense, rather than relying heavily on the U.S. taxpayer. Trump's emphasis on NATO members paying their fair share is not only fiscally responsible, but also a necessary push for greater burden sharing in global security. When it comes to relationships with nations like Australia, the conservative view is that countries should not expect the U.S. to be unconditionally supportive if their own security policies are misaligned with American interests. Instead of continuing to prop up alliances simply for tradition's sake, it is crucial that America's allies demonstrate a commitment to mutual benefit. This focus on pragmatic, results-driven foreign policy ensures that the U.S. remains a leader on the global stage without overextending itself. The
moment is the moment where liberals can basically turn around and say, yeah, you know what? We were freaking right. It wasn't even a P-tape. He is ideologically a commie. He is a KGB asset. Because Trump is doing a lot of stuff, even optically, that I would not suspect him to do. He is. So resistance liberals, you're eating good. This is your moment. Say whatever you want to say. Yes, Krasnov, KGB, Trump is a Russian asset. I'm there with you. I don't agree, but I think it's fun. It's fun to think that is the truth. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Look. Donald Trump was recruited by the KGB in 1987 and goes by the nickname Krasnov. 40,000 likes, 3.1 million views. In 1987, I worked in the 6th Department of the KGB at the USSR in Moscow. The most important area of work in the 6th Department was the acquisition of spies and sources of information from among businessmen of capitalist countries. It was in that year that our department recruited a 40-year-old businessman from the USA, Donald Trump, nicknamed Krasnov. Yeah, the author is a former top spy of Kazakhstan. Previously, he was a KGB spy. Scroll it down the original post. I love that. If Republicans can have fun claiming Barack Obama is a Kenyan Muslim man who is an Al-Qaeda operative for years and years, let the liberals have fun too. Yeah, that's right. He's a communist agent. Donald Trump, the billionaire real estate magnate, the son of a real estate magnate, he is actually secretly, he is not even secretly now, the truth is out there, an actual KGB asset, baby. I love that. This is the closest I've ever been to saying, you know what, liberals, you're right. Now that it's been revealed that Trump has been a Russian asset for 40 years named Krasnov by the FSB, I will write simple thread of various pieces of information that solidifies the truth of everything I've written. Please read and share. Ivana's FBI files indicate she had a questionable origin story and was working with non-stock manipulators and Russian mob. Like mother, like daughter. I've speculated that mom and dad aren't the only Russian assets in the family. Ivanka spun in Putin's chair in 2006. Don Jr. and Ivanka traveled to Moscow. Trump asked Felix.
The speaker criticizes Trump's approach to NATO and military alliances, particularly his demand for other countries to increase defense spending. Trump's stance on relations with China and Russia is also questioned, with an emphasis on his support for Ukraine being inconsistent. A conservative perspective would view Trump's criticism of NATO as a necessary step in recalibrating American foreign policy to ensure that the U.S. is not unfairly burdened by the defense costs of other nations. NATO, which was designed to safeguard Western Europe from Soviet aggression during the Cold War, has evolved into a complex, expensive network where many member nations are not meeting their defense obligations. The United States, under Trump's leadership, took the hard stance that NATO members must pay their fair share to contribute to their own defense. This aligns with the broader conservative idea that the U.S. should not be expected to bear the brunt of security commitments for wealthy allies who do not adequately invest in their own defense. On Trump's stance toward China and Russia, conservatives often appreciate his America First approach, which emphasizes ensuring that American economic and strategic interests take precedence over geopolitical ambitions. Trump's policy toward China, for example, was focused on confronting China's trade imbalances, intellectual property theft, and military aggression in the South China Sea. His tariffs and efforts to decouple the U.S. economy from China were aimed at protecting American jobs and industries from unfair competition. At the same time, Trump's relatively cooperative stance toward Russia was based on a belief that engagement, rather than confrontation, would be more effective in reducing tensions and avoiding unnecessary conflict. Trump understood that Russia's actions on the global stage, while concerning, should not automatically lead to a military escalation. Conservatives argue that a more restrained, diplomatic approach to Russia allows the U.S. to focus on more critical global threats, like China's rising influence and Islamic terrorism, without being drawn into conflicts that do not directly affect American interests. When it comes to Ukraine, conservatives may express skepticism about U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts that do not have a clear, direct impact on national security. Trump's reluctance to fully commit to supporting Ukraine, while it may seem controversial, reflects a broader conservative sentiment that the U.S. should not overextend itself in conflicts that primarily concern other nations. Ukraine's situation is tragic, but it is also viewed by many conservatives as a European issue, one that should be addressed by Europe itself rather than dragging America into yet another foreign entanglement.
Sater, who he publicly stated he may not recognize if they were in a room together to take care of them, sat there together, arranged for a private tour of the Kremlin for Ivanka Jr., didn't join them for an unknown reason. Sater was able to gain access to Putin's office in the Kremlin, and Ivanka sat in Putin's desk chair and spun it around. Suka blyat! Sater has bragged about this on Twitter. His was Super Bowl Sunday, when the dang Murdoch is a suspected Chinese spy who did Putin, and May Musk, of course, shit out the spawn of Satan. Puh! I love this because, like, while this person is explaining this, you can tell he's angrily typing this while he's, like, retelling this story in the thread, and that's why he keeps making these grammatical errors. We've been overtaken by transnational organized crime, the rise and rise of May Musk, China's love affair with Elon Musk's mother. But the sheer volume of Trump's financial entanglements with Russia also point toward the inescapable conclusion that Donald Trump has been, as Donald Jr. acknowledged publicly, financially dependent on Russia. And that, in itself, is a counterintelligence threat. Trump is Krasno. I have nothing to do with Russia. No deals, no loans, no nothing. Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. We see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. Donald Trump Jr. Well, we don't rely on American banks. We have all the funding we need out of Russia. Eric Trump. It's pretty funny because, like,
the speaker mentions Russia's relationship with Ukraine and the broader global implications of Russia's actions. The argument touches on how the U.S. has managed its global standing and the risks involved with undermining global norms. From a conservative viewpoint, the idea of maintaining global norms needs to be re-examined in light of how these norms have historically benefited the U.S. The U.S. has often found itself bound by agreements and international norms that disproportionately serve the interests of other countries, without yielding significant benefits for American citizens. Russia's actions in Ukraine, while troubling, should be addressed primarily by European nations who are geographically and politically closer to the crisis. The European Union and NATO members should bear the responsibility for containing Russian aggression, as their direct involvement in the region is more vital than America's. In terms of global standing, conservatives would argue that America should not be measured solely by its engagement in international institutions or adherence to a set of established global norms. Instead, America's global leadership should be defined by the strength of its economy, military, and diplomatic influence, rather than by adherence to international norms that often do not align with U.S. interests. A strong, independent America is better able to assert its values globally when it is not encumbered by the constraints of international agreements that do not serve its long-term interests.
Like, this is ridiculous. Like, there is no evidence here on this Twitter thread whatsoever, and yet 103,000 likes. 103,000 likes. If you want to understand Trump's, like, deep and intricate financial ties to countries that would be considered foreign adversaries or foreign nations, for example, look to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia basically dominates Donald Trump. They have it all. Saudi Arabia has Donald Trump by the balls. But that's, of course, different because, or even Israel as well, obviously. So that in and of itself is not something that liberals actually get mad about because they're technically considered allies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about American foreign policy, everyone's favorite subject matter, America's foreign policy and the belligerent nature of the Trump administration. Basically, they turned around and said, hey, we're siding with Russia.
His changing stance on the war in Ukraine has been highlighted at the United Nations, where its UN envoy voted twice alongside Russia. First, the two countries opposed a European-drafted resolution condemning Moscow's actions and supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity. Then they backed a US resolution calling for an end to the conflict but containing no criticism of Russia. It comes as the French President Emmanuel Macron says a truce between Ukraine and Russia could be agreed in the coming weeks, following talks with President Trump in the White House amidst straining US-Europe relations. He is the first European leader to visit since Trump's inauguration, ahead of the arrival of the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer on Thursday. In Ukraine, air raid alerts have been sounded again today. Overnight, Poland deployed aircraft to secure its airspace after Russia launched strikes targeting western Ukraine. The BBC's Joe Inwood reports.
In northern Ukraine, new troops are still...
This is just a flex. This is Israel stuff, for the record. Like, what Russia is doing is exactly what Israel stuff. The notion that, like, in the midst of a potential ceasefire negotiation that's taken place, Donald Trump is undermining the Ukrainian position in broad daylight, actively, openly. And also, while that is happening, the Russians are simultaneously bombing Western Ukrainian positions. It's basically to tell everyone in Ukraine that's paying attention, whether they want to pay attention or not, that this is their reality, that they weren't able to take the entirety of the country by force, but they will certainly cut a deal with America that allows them to take certain parts of the country, whether people disagree with that or not.
The speaker discusses the strategic importance of Ukraine's natural resources, particularly rare earth minerals, and their role in global geopolitics. From a conservative perspective, the focus on rare earth minerals is highly significant, especially as the U.S. looks to reduce its reliance on China for these critical resources. The global demand for rare earths, which are essential for technology, energy, and defense sectors, places countries like Ukraine in a strategically important position. Conservatives would argue that it is in America's interest to ensure that access to these minerals is not dominated by adversaries like China or Russia. If Ukraine holds substantial reserves of rare earths, conservatives might argue that the U.S. should work to ensure that these resources are secured and managed in a way that benefits Western economies and allies. The importance of securing these resources extends beyond mere economic considerations. Rare earths are critical for maintaining technological supremacy in defense, energy production, and other sectors. By securing these vital resources, the U.S. can protect its economic and technological competitiveness while reducing dependency on countries that might seek to use such resources as leverage in geopolitical negotiations. Conservatives would assert that America's national security is closely tied to the availability and control of these strategic materials, and maintaining access to them must be a priority in any long-term foreign policy strategy.
Trained, even as the war enters its fourth year. The cost has been huge, but this country appears to be holding on. It's done so through the effort of men like Evhen, who says Ukraine is making more of its own weapons and will continue to do so.
Help won't last forever. It's here today, it might be gone tomorrow.
And that point has been brought home by the dramatic change in US policy. Once Ukraine's greatest ally...
Zelensky sucking up to Israel got a sting now? Dude, he is not a person, okay? I don't know how to describe this. Zelensky has to suck up to Israel. It's not because of genuinely held convictions or whatever. He has to because he is beholden to American interests. He has to do that. Israel quite literally refused to give Ukraine the Iron Dome when Zelensky was demanding it, when Zelensky was asking for it, begging for it, which is the most understandable thing that you would want in a situation like the Russian invasion, at least to like protect certain areas like Kyiv. You know what I mean? I know that like the Iron Dome only works in small fields and smaller areas, but like you could at least deploy Iron Domes in you know, places like Kyiv or even Western Ukraine. Israel said, no, we will not let it get to the hands of the Russians. And then by way of the Russians, the Iranians. That was Israel's response. It is truly wild that, you know, after all of this, there's still people that are maintaining this false notion that America has any sort of like real interest in defending Ukraine.
Again, the relationship's been very special with France and very special with this gentleman on my right.
They've always got on well, but there were points of disagreement.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid. We paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
And that was not the only crack in the transatlantic alliance.
We need to reconfirm
money, to be clear,
that the aggression should be condemned and discredited, not rewarded.
In an extraordinary development at the UN, European countries and the US found themselves backing different resolutions on Ukraine, with America on the same side as Russia, Belarus, and North Korea.
MAGA is accidentally becoming communist? Okay, guys, Russia, I need to repeat this for people that don't know this, but Russia is not communist. Russia, as a nation state, is very capitalist. Vladimir Putin is not a socialist. Russia is not engaging in any action to uphold the principles of Marxist-Leninism. Russia is a kleptocracy. They're commies, Hassan, he's Krasnov. Yeah. I mean, the DPRK is not even communist. Like... at least in terms of how their election process works. They're not necessarily the most democratic People's Republic of Korea. USA is already a kleptocracy too. Yes, you're not wrong. Anyway, none of that matters in this instance, because ultimately irredentist action or imperialist action from any nation that violates the sovereignty of another is completely unacceptable. It does not matter if it's Russia doing it. It does not matter if it's America doing it. This has been my firmly held commitment and principle in perpetuity. Having said that, of course, people will make up their own minds regardless. Yeah, it's the same. No, it's China as well. Yes, this also extends to China as well. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ukraine is cooked. Both Russia and the West are going to carve up the country and turn it into a financial colony for the sole purpose of extracting wealth and resources from the people that remain. My family and so many other Ukrainians have no desire to return, and I don't blame them. Yeah, no, I mean, that was slated to happen no matter what. It's a chicken or the egg situation. Was it Russia trying to enforce its will upon Ukrainian politics first, or was it NGOs and civil society organizations by way of the State Department projecting power in Ukraine and trying to destabilize and bring Ukraine into the Western sphere of influence? It does not matter. What matters is ultimately that the Ukrainian people are going to get fucked over in the process no matter what. And there was very little that they could do to maintain sovereignty, autonomy, and carve a path forward for themselves where they had any say in their own personal politics. Devastating.
The speaker highlights the role of President Trump in undermining the concept of democracy, emphasizing his disregard for established norms and his tendency to focus on consolidating personal power. From a conservative perspective, the notion that Trump has undermined democracy is often viewed as an exaggeration or mischaracterization. Trump's critics frequently cite his challenging of established norms, particularly when it comes to checks and balances. But conservatives argue that his willingness to challenge the political establishment was actually a necessary corrective. For decades, both political parties in the U.S. have failed to adequately represent the interests of the American people. Trump's outsider approach, including his skepticism of the so-called deep state, resonated with millions of voters who felt that the system was rigged against them. Trump's leadership style, often confrontational, direct, and unconventional, was a deliberate push against what conservatives see as a complacent political elite that was more interested in maintaining power than in serving the people. His calls to reform institutions such as the FBI and the Department of Justice were grounded in a belief that these agencies had become politicized and no longer acted in the best interest of the American people. Rather than undermining democracy, conservatives would argue that Trump's approach represented a necessary challenge to the status quo, restoring the idea that the government exists to serve the people, not the other way around. Trump's rhetoric, while often criticized for being polarizing, reflects a broader frustration with the political establishment that conservatives believe has long ignored the needs and concerns of working-class Americans. In the eyes of many conservatives, Trump's focus on prioritizing American jobs, reducing illegal immigration, and challenging the globalist agenda was a defense of the democratic principles of sovereignty, self-determination, and national pride. The speaker discusses the failure of Trump's policies in handling the COVID-19 pandemic, citing his administration's lack of preparation and the consequences of delayed response in the early stages of the outbreak. On the issue of COVID-19, conservatives would argue that Trump faced an unprecedented global crisis and had to make difficult decisions with limited information. The rapid spread of the virus took the entire world by surprise, and while hindsight allows critics to point out mistakes, Trump's administration moved quickly to limit travel from China and implemented policies like the Operation Warp Speed initiative to develop vaccines in record time. Critics often overlook the fact that Trump was criticized from both sides of the political aisle when he initially took decisive actions, such as imposing travel bans and emphasizing the need for a rapid vaccine development. The conservative viewpoint acknowledges that the initial phases of the pandemic were chaotic, but Trump worked with private companies and federal agencies to fast-track vaccine development, something that many liberals would consider a major success. Under Trump's leadership, the U.S. was able to develop and distribute vaccines far faster than many other countries, and this has been seen by conservatives as a major accomplishment. Furthermore, Trump's handling of the pandemic was constantly under the microscope, with many states implementing their own policies. Conservatives argue that governors, not the federal government, should have taken the lead in managing the pandemic. The lockdowns imposed in many blue states were viewed as overly restrictive, damaging to the economy, and harmful to businesses and personal freedoms. In the eyes of conservatives, these lockdowns represented an overreach of government power that violated basic freedoms and caused long-lasting economic damage.
Devastating situation. Speaking of chicken or the egg, it is virtually impossible to find eggs now. Holy shit. But that's, Trump's America, baby. You already know. All right, Ukraine-U.S. reaches an agreement on the mineral deal, ladies and gentlemen.
There have been several versions of this deal proposed by the United States. All have been rejected. Now it appears this version has been accepted by Ukraine. That's what we're hearing from Ukrainian officials, but still no confirmation coming from the United States. What are you hearing?
We're getting no confirmation, as you say. Exactly, as you said, there is no confirmation from American sources. We know that Donald Trump had suggested that Vladimir Zelensky would be heading to the White House at some point either this week or next week to sign a deal. We don't know any dates on that. Nothing has been confirmed. We know that the United States wanted 100% of the rare earth minerals from Ukraine. That was obviously rejected by the Ukrainians, and that's what led to a great deal of anger between the two sides. But there were still negotiations going on. What appears to have been agreed is that the United States will get 50% after Ukraine takes out $500 billion to try and improve the economy. In some of the drafts that are circulating, and there are various drafts that are, one of the key sentences keeps repeating, which is the US government intends to provide long-term financial commitment to develop a stable and economically prosperous Ukraine, which suggests that whatever happens, this is tying the US into the Ukraine for a significant period of time. What appears to be missing are any security guarantees This is all financial.
U.S. exploits Ukraine with promises of NATO membership, lies about the amount of aid given, and takes away crucial minerals. Meanwhile, Russia has assumed control of Ukraine's steel industry and faces no repercussions from the U.S. or to pay reparations. Yeah, it's like two hyenas picking apart a carcass. Ukraine is the carcass in this situation. They're just picking it apart for scraps. Great stuff overall. Fantastic. Surely there will be no resentment.
Not a Russian missile attack, but a controlled explosion in a Ukrainian mine for graphite, a mineral used in lithium-ion batteries and nuclear reactors. Ukraine also has titanium used in the aerospace industry. But the draft deal doesn't surrender control over Ukraine's mineral resources to the US, as President Trump initially demanded. Rather, it's an attempt to ensure that both countries benefit. Today, President Zelensky was posing with a map of Ukraine's mineral.
Look how quickly Big Homie played ball, by the way. Am I crazy? I feel like last week he was talking about, Mr. President Donald Trump, you are living in Vladimir Putin's lies. Next week he's like, look at my mineral map. I love Mr. President. I love these minerals. Please help us extract, Mr. President. Trump is out here being like, dude, you're a dictator. You suck. You're the reason why your country got invaded. You ain't sh**. Your comedy's got horrible letterbox reviews.
The speaker criticizes Trump's rhetoric on issues such as race and immigration, specifically focusing on the divisiveness of his words and the rise in hate crimes that followed his presidency. Conservatives argue that Trump's stance on immigration and race issues was not about promoting division, but rather about advocating for policies that prioritize the interests of American citizens. On immigration, Trump's America First policy sought to protect U.S. workers and ensure that immigration was legal, orderly, and beneficial to the nation. His tough stance on illegal immigration was not an attack on immigrants, but a call for enforcing the rule of law. Many conservatives view Trump's emphasis on securing the southern border as a necessary step in maintaining national security and preventing illegal immigration from overwhelming the welfare system. Trump's rhetoric, which was often direct and confrontational, was intended to highlight the challenges posed by illegal immigration and to advocate for the American worker, especially those in economically disadvantaged communities who may be directly affected by illegal immigration and job competition. Far from promoting hate, many conservatives see his language as a means of calling attention to issues that had been ignored by previous administrations. The rise in hate crimes, while tragic, is often framed by conservatives as a broader societal issue that cannot be entirely blamed on one individual or administration. Conservatives argue that Trump's rhetoric, despite being sharp at times, did not lead to a nationwide rise in racism or hate crimes. Instead, the focus should be on addressing the root causes of division in American society, including economic disparity, lack of educational opportunities, and the breakdown of traditional communities. The speaker suggests that Trump's rhetoric and policies have eroded trust in institutions, particularly the media, and deepened political polarization in America. From a conservative viewpoint, Trump's criticism of the media and his combative relationship with journalists is often viewed as a necessary response to what is seen as a biased, liberal mainstream media that frequently distorts the truth. Trump's frequent use of the term fake news was not merely an attack on journalists, but an attempt to push back against a media landscape that conservatives believe has been compromised by ideological bias and a refusal to objectively report the news. Conservatives argue that the media's portrayal of Trump was overwhelmingly negative, regardless of his policies or achievements. The media often focused on sensationalist stories or exaggerated claims, contributing to the erosion of trust in the Fourth Estate. In this context, Trump's rhetoric was seen as an effort to fight back against a media establishment that was perceived to be hostile to his presidency and the conservative agenda. As for the claim that Trump deepened political polarization, conservatives argue that this division was largely a result of the political left's increasingly radical shift, particularly on issues like social justice, identity politics, and the expansion of government power. Trump's presidency was a response to these forces, providing an alternative vision for America that prioritized individual freedoms, economic growth, and national pride. The speaker concludes by stating that Trump's presidency was marked by numerous failures, including mishandling foreign relations, weakening democratic institutions, and deepening social divisions. From a conservative perspective, Trump's presidency was far from a failure. Many conservatives see his tenure as one of the most successful in recent history, particularly when it comes to strengthening the economy, promoting job growth, and securing American borders. His tax cuts, deregulation efforts, and pro-business policies contributed to the strongest economy the U.S. had seen in decades before the pandemic hit. In terms of foreign relations, Trump's America First approach was highly regarded by conservatives. His renegotiation of NAFTA, now USMCA, withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, and efforts to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. were seen as moves that protected American jobs and interests. His stance on China, in particular, was praised for confronting unfair trade practices and pushing for a more balanced global economic order. While Trump's presidency certainly had its controversies and moments of conflict, conservatives view his efforts as a return to prioritizing American citizens and their needs above globalist agendas. The deep divisions in American society, many conservatives argue, are more a result of the left's embrace of radical ideologies and the mainstream media's unfair treatment of Trump than a reflection of any inherent flaws in Trump's leadership.
I mean, what is he supposed to do, to be fair? He ain't got nothing. I think part of it is that Trump let slip yesterday when talking about Zelensky coming to D.C. on Friday that they were going to provide another $350 billion in support, mentioned Zelensky could fight as long as he wants. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. That would be... I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything. Are they going to lower the draft age? If they actually end up lowering the draft age for Ukraine, I'm going to lose my mind.
Resources. For him, the key is that any deal should include U.S. security guarantees. It's not yet clear whether it does. And he seemed unaware that while Ukraine has many critical minerals, it doesn't have much in the way of rare earths.
We very much need rare...
Did Disney dupe Donald Trump into thinking that Ukraine has rare earth minerals, which Donald Trump mistranslated to raw earth minerals? Raw earth! We're gonna the earth raw!
The problem is that 90% of rare earths are processed in China, even when mined in the US. The bottleneck isn't finding more rare earth deposits. It's China's domination of processing, and the Ukraine deal isn't going to solve that.
This was a deal from day one. They should have known this happens all the time with America. Then again, it's either be invaded by Russia or be an indentured slave of America. Pick your poison. I don't know if it would have been an invasion of Russia. I think it would have been an overtaking by Russia. And then Russia would still end up most likely taking advantage of your natural resources. It was no matter what. Like, Ukraine was screwed no matter what, since they didn't have nukes. Don't give up the nukes. This is just a joint US-Russia invasion on different fronts. Yeah. People call him Krasnov, not just for his alignment with Russian interests, but because ex-KGB officials alleged he was cultivated as an asset in the 80s. No, I know. I love that one. Also, if Donald Trump is Krasnov, then was Biden also Krasnov? Was he also a Russian asset? Because apparently Biden was also quietly trying to cut the same mineral extraction deal with Ukraine while he was also in charge. This is why I say American foreign policy is uniparty. Do you believe the Russian asset claims? No, I don't believe the Russian asset claims. Anyway, HasanAbi, the double Krasnov theory. Oh my God.
The speaker accuses Trump of prioritizing personal interests and political advantage over national unity, suggesting that he sought to benefit from division rather than fostering a sense of cooperation. From a conservative standpoint, the assertion that Trump prioritized personal interests over national unity is deeply contested. Conservatives argue that Trump's America First agenda was, in fact, an effort to put the interests of the American people above those of foreign nations or the global elite. His America First approach to foreign policy, trade, and national security was seen as an expression of patriotism and a commitment to improving the lives of everyday Americans. Moreover, Trump's tough stance on issues like illegal immigration, trade imbalances, and American manufacturing resonated with a wide swath of voters who felt overlooked by previous administrations. Rather than dividing the country, Many conservatives believe that Trump sought to restore national pride, strengthen the middle class, and promote economic opportunities for people who had been left behind by globalization and industrial outsourcing. Critics often accuse Trump of fostering division, but from a conservative viewpoint, the president was simply advocating for policies that challenged the established order, a system that many conservatives view as corrupt and unresponsive to the needs of ordinary citizens. It is important to note that the left-wing and media-driven narrative about division often overlooks the fact that Trump galvanized millions of working-class voters, many of whom felt politically disenfranchised. Trump's refusal to back down from tough stances on issues like trade and immigration was seen not as self-serving, but as a steadfast commitment to America's long-term interests. In a political climate where career politicians and special interests had dominated for years, Trump's unwavering approach was viewed as a necessary disruption. The speaker discusses the Trump administration's handling of racial tensions, particularly in relation to events such as the Charlottesville rally and the aftermath of George Floyd's death, accusing Trump of exacerbating racial divides. Conservatives often defend Trump's position on issues of race and his response to events like the Charlottesville rally by emphasizing his condemnation of violence from all sides. Trump stated clearly that there were very fine people on both sides of the Charlottesville protest, but he also denounced the actions of white supremacists and neo-Nazis. Conservatives argue that this statement was misinterpreted and taken out of context by the media to paint him as a racist, when in fact, his intent was to avoid aligning with either side in the protest, particularly given that counter-protesters also engaged in violent behavior. In the case of George Floyd's death, conservatives point out that Trump made it clear that the incident was tragic and that justice needed to be served. However, Trump also advocated for law and order, recognizing the importance of maintaining peace in the wake of protests. From a conservative perspective, the left-wing response, which included calls to defund the police and portray law enforcement as universally oppressive, was not only a dangerous narrative, but also counterproductive to addressing issues of racial inequality in a meaningful way. Conservatives argue that Trump's focus on law and order was aimed at ensuring safety and stability in communities, especially in cities where rioting and looting occurred. Conservatives believe that Trump's call to support police officers, who are often the targets of unjust criticism, was not only a defense of public safety, but also a recognition that law enforcement officers deserve respect for the difficult and dangerous work they do every day. The speaker claims that Trump's behavior and rhetoric paved the way for the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021, suggesting that Trump's refusal to accept the 2020 election results contributed to the violent attack on the Capitol. From a conservative viewpoint, the Capitol riot on January 6th was a tragic and unfortunate event, but it was not the result of Trump's rhetoric or actions alone. Conservatives argue that the violent storming of the Capitol was the result of several factors, including frustration with the perceived irregularities in the 2020 election and the broader climate of political polarization in the country. Trump, in his speeches, never explicitly incited violence. Instead, he called for peaceful protests and had consistently urged his supporters to express their opinions without resorting to violence. Trump's refusal to accept the election results is rooted in a long-standing conservative concern about election integrity. Many conservatives, particularly those who supported Trump, believed that there were significant issues with the election process, ranging from changes in voting procedures to the role of social media companies in censoring conservative voices. Trump's legal challenges to the results, while ultimately unsuccessful, were driven by his belief that the election was not conducted fairly. Conservatives argue that the real blame for the violence should be directed at those who actually participated in the riot, not at Trump, who had consistently urged his supporters to be peaceful. Furthermore, many conservatives contend that the mainstream media and Democrats unfairly politicized the events of January 6th to delegitimize Trump and his supporters. The rhetoric surrounding the riot, from conservatives' perspective, has been used as an excuse to silence dissent and implement broader censorship of right-wing voices.
Misunderstanding my point that way is really funny. Yeah. Brandonov Brandanovsky and Krasnov are both KGB assets. Is there anything you like about Trump and or his admin? Yes, I like that he's the real Manchurian candidate and that he actually is not a Russian asset, but a Chinese one. And he is literally undermining American hegemonic superpower status every day of the week, dismantling KKK's U.S. aid soft power capabilities. Wait until he sells the vassal state of Australia to Chinese protectorate. That's right. Yeah. Say bye-bye to AUKUS, buddy. He's doing the same thing he did with Barack Obama. You know how like he wanted to undermine everything that Barack Obama had done? He heard Joe Brandon talk about the Finlandization of NATO, but the NATOization of Finland. AUKUS, Jack. One too many times and decided, you know what? I'm going to dismantle AUKUS piece by piece. Five Eyes? More like bye-byes. Agent Orange, dude. White House officials pushes to axe Canada from the Five Eyes. Oh my God, he literally, the mad lad. Five Eyes, bye-byes. Oh my God. We need to find a Chinese name for Donald Trump. JD Pondon, dude. The absolute mad lad. He said, nah, no more American global dominance. Yeah, it's Four Eyes now. Five Eyes, bye-byes. It's Four Eyes. Oh my God.
The speaker suggests that Trump's presidency represents a step backward for the nation in terms of democratic values, suggesting that Trump's rhetoric and policies have diminished the country's moral standing in the world. From a conservative perspective, Trump's presidency was a reassertion of American strength and sovereignty on the global stage. Trump was criticized by some for his America First foreign policy, but many conservatives view it as a necessary recalibration of U.S. involvement in global affairs. Under Trump, the U.S. withdrew from international agreements that were seen as disadvantageous, such as the Paris Climate Agreement and the Iran nuclear deal. Conservatives argue that these actions were not a step backward, but rather an attempt to protect American interests and prevent U.S. taxpayers from bearing the costs of globalist policies. Conservatives believe that Trump's foreign policy was marked by a return to strength, with a focus on securing fair trade deals, holding adversaries accountable, and prioritizing the safety and security of American citizens. His dealings with China, NATO, and North Korea were seen as bold and pragmatic, aimed at strengthening American power while challenging unfair practices that had persisted under previous administrations. Trump's unorthodox approach to diplomacy may have been unconventional, but many conservatives argue that it was effective in advancing America's interests without compromising national sovereignty. In terms of moral standing, conservatives believe that Trump's policies, such as securing energy independence, supporting the military, and advocating for religious freedoms, were aligned with American values and the principles of liberty and justice that have historically guided U.S. foreign policy. The speaker concludes by asserting that Trump's impact on the country will be long-lasting, noting that his divisive rhetoric and policy failures will continue to shape American politics for years to come. While the speaker predicts that Trump's impact will be lasting, conservatives believe that Trump's legacy is one of positive transformation for America. His presidency revitalized the conservative movement and brought issues such as border security, economic nationalism, and American exceptionalism to the forefront of national discourse. Conservatives argue that, far from being divisive, Trump's presidency was a necessary and bold challenge to the status quo, representing the desires of millions of working-class Americans who felt left behind by Washington elites. Trump's influence on the Republican Party has been profound, and many conservatives view him as the champion of a populist, America First agenda that will shape future elections. His approach to governance, characterized by his unfiltered communication, focus on direct action, and prioritization of American interests, is seen as a model for future conservative leaders. Ultimately, while Trump's presidency had its controversies, many conservatives believe that it paved the way for a stronger, more united America, one where citizens are encouraged to take ownership of their country's future and to reject the globalist forces that have shaped U.S. policy for decades. The speaker reflects on the political consequences of Trump's presidency, asserting that his influence is still strongly felt, especially among his supporters, who continue to challenge the political system. From a conservative perspective, Trump's influence is far from over and continues to drive significant change in the political landscape. His base remains loyal, and many conservatives believe that this reflects a deep dissatisfaction with the establishment political class. Trump's presidency inspired millions of Americans who felt their voices had been ignored by the elites in Washington, and his influence has catalyzed a political awakening among many citizens. For these Americans, Trump's leadership provided a much-needed voice for the forgotten working-class voters, and his political movement remains strong. Conservatives argue that Trump's legacy is defined not by divisiveness, as the speaker claims, but by the fact that he was able to break through the media narratives and challenge the status quo. His political movement has empowered everyday people to stand up for their rights and has emboldened many to demand a return to policies that prioritize American interests above globalist priorities. Furthermore, the ongoing challenges posed by Trump's supporters should be viewed in a more positive light, not as a threat to democracy, but as an active political engagement that represents the will of a large portion of the American electorate. Trump's influence on the Republican Party has reshaped the direction of American conservatism, inspiring more candidates to adopt his populist policies, and as such, his impact will likely continue to shape American politics for many years to come. The speaker reflects on the challenges that Trump's presidency posed to traditional political norms, claiming that he significantly eroded public trust in the political system and institutions. While it is true that Trump's presidency challenged traditional political norms, conservatives argue that these challenges were exactly what the country needed. For decades, Americans had seen the rise of career politicians who prioritized their own interests or the interests of special interest groups over those of the average American. Trump's outsider status was appealing to many who felt disenfranchised by the political establishment. Rather than eroding trust in political institutions, conservatives argue that Trump's presidency actually brought more transparency and accountability to the political process. His direct communication style, through social media and rallies, bypassed the traditional media filters, allowing him to speak directly to the American people. For many conservatives, this was a breath of fresh air, as it broke the stranglehold of elite-controlled narratives that often misrepresented their concerns. Trump's unorthodox approach to governance and his willingness to challenge the establishment were seen as a necessary step in restoring faith in the political process. Conservatives argue that the real erosion of trust has been caused by the corrupt practices of career politicians, who have often worked to maintain their own power rather than serving the needs of the people. The speaker concludes by discussing the damage caused to democratic institutions and norms under Trump, suggesting that his approach to governing set a dangerous precedent for future leaders. Conservatives would argue that Trump did not damage democratic institutions, but rather revitalized them by challenging entrenched political elites and special interests that had too much power for too long. The idea that Trump's presidency set a dangerous precedent is largely a reflection of the establishment's fear of losing control, not a true analysis of his impact on democratic norms. Trump's focus on returning power to the American people was seen by conservatives as a restoration of democratic principles. He advocated for policies that reduced the influence of big corporations and foreign governments, and his administration was marked by deregulation, which many conservatives viewed as a way to allow businesses and individuals more freedom to succeed without unnecessary interference from government. Moreover, Trump's approach to governance, prioritizing the will of the people and rejecting the influence of foreign powers, was in line with conservative values of national sovereignty, individual liberty, and limited government. While Trump's rhetoric and style were unconventional, his policies were often aligned with the principles of constitutional governance, focusing on issues like border security, tax cuts, and strengthening the military. Far from setting a dangerous precedent, Trump's presidency showed that the American people could challenge the political establishment and demand a government that works for them. not for the global elite. This, conservatives believe, will continue to shape the future of American democracy in a positive way. The speaker finishes by reiterating their view that Trump's legacy is one of divisiveness and authoritarianism, questioning whether future generations will be able to overcome the damage he caused to American democracy. Conservatives would strongly disagree with the assertion that Trump's legacy is one of authoritarianism. Rather than eroding democratic values, conservatives argue that Trump's presidency was a bold affirmation of American ideals. Trump emphasized personal liberty, individual rights, and a government that is accountable to the people. His administration worked to limit the reach of government and reduce its interference in citizens' daily lives. From a conservative perspective, it is not Trump who poses a threat to democracy, but rather the forces of collectivism and government overreach. Trump's populist movement sought to restore power to the American people, challenging the deep state and the entrenched political establishment that many conservatives view as antithetical to the principles of self-government. Conservatives would argue that, far from leaving a legacy of division, Trump's presidency sparked a movement that is working to rebuild a more responsive and accountable political system. Future generations, they believe, will look back on Trump's presidency as a turning point in American history, a moment when the American people began to demand a government that truly represents their interests. Thanks for tuning in to ClemSaur. If you enjoyed today's discussion or have your own thoughts, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your take. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on the latest breakdowns and reactions. Stay informed, stay critical, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, keep questioning and keep thinking.